the law is so clear, because the law is so unambiguous, because the consensus is so overwhelming, and because this consensus is grounded in international law, it's unsurprising that the Israelis are not too fond of the law. So during those negotiations that were, the transcripts of which were revealed in the Palestine papers, you come across the foreign minister at the time, Tzipi Livni. She's now the head of Israel's so-called centrist party, Kadima. She recently was regrettably allowed to enter the UK, the United Kingdom, because the laws against war criminals were modified to enable her a free passage. In any case, Ms. Livni, she said, and I'm quoting her now, "I am a lawyer, but I am against law, international law in particular." In fact, the reason she was against international law was because she was a lawyer, because she knew that on all of those allegedly controversial issues, borders, Jerusalem, the refugees, and the settlements, she knew the law was completely unambiguous. There's no debate or dispute, or to put it otherwise, legally, Israel doesn't have a leg to stand on. And so that just leaves two parties. The Palestinians, namely the Palestinian Authority and Hamas. It's fairly clear, sometimes it's painfully clear, that the Palestinian so-called Authority has agreed to all the terms to resolve the conflict. Sometimes it feels as if they're ready to agree to anything in order to end the conflict. But I don't think any rational or reasonable person would want to deny at this late stage that the Palestinian so-called Authority is an obstacle to resolving the conflict. We often are told, however, that Hamas is, but even the question of Hamas has been grossly distorted, because Hamas has repeatedly stated, I'll quote the leader of Hamas, the head of their Politburo, Khalid Mishal. He said in March 2008, most Palestinian forces, including Hamas, accept a state on the 1967 borders. Even after right after Israel's murderous invasion of Gaza in 2008-9, Michel said, right afterwards again, the objective remains the constitution of a Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital, the return of the Israelis to the pre-67 borders, and the right of return of our refugees. And Hamas has repeatedly said, if there's a national referendum among the Palestinians, and in this referendum they support a two-state settlement on the June 67 border, etc., that they said they'll accept the will of the people. That's the picture, relatively uncomplicated, of how to resolve the conflict in theory. Of course, as everybody in this room knows, there have been practical objections raised to that way of resolving the conflict. And the time that remains to me, I want to look at two of those practical objections. One on the Israeli side and one on the Palestinian side, or the side of those who say they support the Palestinians. On the side of the Israelis, they say with more and more vehemence, and as the American presidential election approaches, and Mr. Obama is trying to fill his war chest, Mr. Obama says with more and more vehemence as well, that the Palestinians must recognize Israel as a Jewish state, as the state of the Jewish people. So, Prime Minister Netanyahu, he's called on the Palestinians, and now I'm quoting him, to recognize the right of the Jewish people to a state of their own in this land, to finally do what they have refused to do for 62 years, to say yes to a Jewish state, to say, I will accept a Jewish state. Those 6 words will change history. So, Mr. Netanyahu says that the consensus for resolving the conflict, the two-state settlement, and a just resolution of the refugee question, Mr. Netanyahu says it's insufficient. It's not enough. It's not even the first step. And Mr. Obama, he says, a lasting peace will involve Israel as a Jewish state and the homeland of the Jewish people. If Mr. Netanyahu said that the moon was made of green cheese, is there anyone who would doubt what Mr. Obama would say tomorrow about the material constitution of the moon? In any event, let's look at the record. Many of you in this room are blessedly young. You have a long future to look forward to, and only a short past to look back on. That's very beautiful. I think I put it with poetic eloquence. The downside is the future ain't so great. Enjoy your youth, because it only gets worse. Much worse, actually. But you'll have a lot of time to enjoy, because you won't find a job. You'll have a lot of free time on your hands. That's so long as Mr. Obama doesn't implement his final solution to the employment problem. In any event, for those who are older, they will remember that there have already been 2 peace treaties signed between Israel and its Arab neighbors. In 1979, a peace treaty was signed between Israel and Egypt. And in 1994, a peace treaty was signed between Israel and Jordan, a formal treaty. And anyone in this room, through the miracle of the internet, when you aren't surfing for other things, can simply find a treaty on the web. There is no mention in the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty of recognizing Israel as a Jewish state. There is no mention in the Jordanian-Israeli peace treaty of recognizing Israel as a Jewish state. Now, Mr. Netanyahu was always lecturing the Palestinians that they should follow the example of Anwar Sadat, who signed the 1979 treaty, and King Hussein of Jordan, who signed the 1994 treaty. Well, if they are the models which the Palestinians are supposed to emulate, why is it that their treaties, or no demand was made on them to recognize Israel as a Jewish state, but it's suddenly become, to use the fancy Latin term, a sine qua non, which just means a necessity, when it comes to the Palestinians. Then there's the question, you want Israel to be recognized as a Jewish state. Well, 1/4 of the Israeli population is not Jewish. So what does it mean for them if you recognize Israel as a Jewish state? It's possible that it won't mean very much. The UK is an Anglican state, it has officially an Anglican religion, but it has no real impact for the population. But it also, on the other hand, it can have very ugly implications for that 1/4 of the population that's not Jewish. And the bottom line is, nobody even knows what it means to recognize Israel as a Jewish state. As I said, it could have benign consequences, but it also can have malignant consequences, because nobody knows really what it means. Israel's most revered former Supreme Court Justice, Aharon Barak, he acknowledged, he said, we still have not worked out properly the interrelationship between the Jewishness of the state and the fact that it is a state of all of its citizens. The problem of, you want to call it a Jewish state, but what about all of its citizens, 1/4 of whom are not Jewish? He admits, we don't know really what it means. So why should Palestinians be duty-bound to recognize a principle, the meaning of which even Israel's former Supreme Court Justice cannot tell you what it is? Now, there's this character named Dennis Ross. Who's heard of Dennis Ross? Interesting. Only 2 people? 3, 4? That was the number of people who were going to buy my new book. I'll remember that, believe me. In any case, he's the main person in charge of the Israel-Palestine conflict. He was in the Clinton administration, and now he is in the Obama administration. Everything old is new again. Well, Mr. Ross, he says that these Arabs, they're not prepared to accept Israel's existence. They deny the Zionist enterprise any moral legitimacy. For them, he says, these Arabs, Israel exists as a fact, not a right. So for him, the problem is, these Arabs, they recognize Israel as a fact, but not a right. They refuse to accept the legitimacy of the state of Israel. Now, fortunately, we have a very good test of whether the Arab position is unreasonable or not. There are several people in this room who I can tell are of Pakistani or Indian descent, but more of Pakistani descent. So how many of you are Pakistani? Raise your hand. Raise your hand up high. Be proud that you're Pakistani. That's what they say in the United States. You should be proud. Not as many as I thought. In any event, let's take the case of Mr. Gandhi. Mr. Gandhi was absolutely, totally, to the last day of his life, he was opposed to the creation of Pakistan. He said, I do not accept that there exists a separate Muslim people in India. He said, we are all brothers. There is not a separate Muslim nation. It's a lie. Whether you agree with him or not, he emphatically believed it. And frankly, to be fair to the Mahatma, he paid with his life because of that belief. Many people forget how Gandhi was assassinated during the partition in 1947, when blood was flowing in the streets of major Indian cities. It was a ghastly, internecine bloodletting. Gandhi was very emphatic that he would not accept the hatred between Muslims and Hindus. And he would go from, in the 1947, he went from Hindu temple to Hindu temple, and he insisted on beginning the prayer service by reading a passage from the Quran, which drove the Indian Hindu fanatics crazy to the point that one of them eventually assassinated him and killed him. But even though he upheld and paid with his life for the belief in fraternity between the Hindus and Muslims of India, he was absolutely against the idea of partition. He said the idea of partition is, let me put it even more toughly, he said the idea of a Pakistani state is a sin. He said the British partition of India was poisonous. And he said, listen to his words, he said, he accepts India as an accomplished fact, he accepts the division of India, the partition, as an accomplished fact. But he said, I will never believe in the idea of a distinct Muslim nationalism. And in fact, like it or not, but the facts are there. There's no difference between Gandhi's position on Pakistan or the partition of India and the position of Hamas on Israel. They are exactly the same. The position of Hamas on the position of Hamas on Israel is they accept it as an accomplished fact, but they will never accept its legitimacy. That was exactly Gandhi's position in Pakistan. Exactly the same. Now, I see this young man is restless, and he has the famous "you have 5 minutes" card. I know that from rich experience. What? Sorry. Yeah, I see, I know. I think we have the room through the generosity of the university. We have it till 9:30. So I'm going to just take 10 minutes more, and then we'll have 1/2 hour for questions. And we'll wrap up exactly on time. Does that sound right? Okay, let me now turn to one last objection, the objection that's often put forth by the supporters of the Palestinians. And that's the question of the settlements. Namely, many people say this two-state settlement, whatever you might think of it in theory, in practice, it's been it's been bypassed by facts on the ground. There are now 500,000 settlers, Jewish settlers in the occupied Palestinian territories, 500,000 settlers, and it's inconceivable that we can create a Palestinian state which is a real state and not just an Indian reservation, a real state with this mass of illegal Jewish settlers already occupying the West Bank. How many people are familiar with that argument? Raise your hand. Raise your hand up high. Good. How many people are convinced by it? Raise your hand. Find it a convincing argument. Raise your hand. Don't be afraid. The worst that can happen is you'll be assassinated. No. This is America. How many people? Okay. Let me just run through the facts for you quickly, and then we'll wrap up. There's a lot of misunderstanding about the settlements. Physically, the settlements only occupy about 1% of the West Bank, what are called the built-up areas. The reason Israel, it's true, has annexed 43% of the West Bank in order to accommodate the settlements, road networks, military bases, etc. It's annexed about 43%. In fact, however, the settlements themselves occupy about 1%. Israel has created, and it says it wants to keep, what it calls settlement blocks. Settlement blocks basically means there's a settlement there, there's a settlement there, and there's a settlement there. So Israel says, we want to keep the whole area connecting the settlements. And those are called settlement blocks. And it is correct that if Israel were to keep what it calls its settlement blocks, there can be a Palestinian state. Because one settlement block called Ma'ale Adumim, it cuts the West Bank in half. And also cuts off East Jerusalem from the West Bank as a whole. You can't have a state if Ma'ale Adumim stays in place. There's another settlement in the north, it's called Ariel Shamron. With two fingers it's called, because it looks like that. And it too divides the northern part of the West Bank in half. And it's also purposely situated on one of the main water aquifers in the West Bank. If they keep Ariel Shamron, there can't be a Palestinian state. However, I'm not one to praise the Palestinian so-called authority, but credit given where credit due. During the negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinian Authority, unfortunately, because of lack of equipment, a misunderstanding, because I was using an overhead projector, not the internet, I can't show you the map, But let me just try to verbally describe it. The Palestinians said, look, we cannot have a real state if you want to keep those settlement blocks. But even though every last settler is illegally in our country, that's what the International Court of Justice said, the Palestinians said, we're going to do our best to try to work out a practical settlement to end the conflict. And they said, look, we're going to present a map to you. And the map is the following. We're going to let you keep 1.9% of the West Bank, 1.9% just along the border. And by keeping that 1.9%, you will be able to keep more than 60% of your settlers, 310,000 of the 500,000. And because those settlements are just along the border, you will be able to keep 63% of your settlers, and we'll get a little land swap from you, from Israel, for the 1.9%, and our state will basically be intact. If I had the picture in front of me, I think I can convince you it was an extraordinarily generous and realistic resolution of the conflict. Israel would, despite the law, in flagrant violation of the law, but nonetheless it could keep 63% of the settlers, 310,000 of the 500,000, and there would be a tiny land swap for the 1.9%, and we would have our state. Now, some of you are thinking, okay, 500,000 minus 310,000, that still leaves 290,000. I see he has his calculator out right there, figuring it out. Either that or he's text messaging his girlfriend saying, I'll be out of here in a half hour. I prefer to think he's doing the calculation, though it's not so hard to do in your head. In any event, but as a matter of fact, even the 290,000 settlers don't pose a very big obstacle, because most Israelis went to live in the occupied territories because they got all of these subsidies and all of these freebies from the government, subsidized mortgages and so forth. They're what's called quality of life settlers. They didn't go because they were crazy, fanatics from Brooklyn, New York. They just went because the rents were low, the mortgages were low. And a large number of them say, if you pay us, we'll leave. We're not committed to staying here. There's a small handful, you could say at maximum 10,000, I think the figure is probably closer to 5,000. There are 5 to 10,000 Meshuggah Jews. Meshuggah is the Yiddish for crazy. 500,000 Meshuggah Jews. Okay. Now, what are we going to do with them? I know what Obama would do, but I would prefer a more peaceful resolution of the conflict in Gandhi's spirit. So, anybody here has been to Hebron? Raise your hand. Good, raise your hand. This is a larger number than that will purchase my book. Not to belabor that point. Well, as you know, Hebron al-Khalil has about 160,000 Muslims. They tend to be on the conservative side, and they're very stubborn, the Hebronite Muslims. Are you from Hebron? You are. So you know the joke. A Hebronite, he fell off a 6-story building, fell to the ground, and he lived. Why? He landed on his head. They're very thick-headed, stubborn Hebronites. So, and then amidst this huge mass of Hebronites, there are these 200 to 300 crazy Jews, mostly from Brooklyn, who think that Hebron is theirs by right, the whole story. So, what do we do with them? How do we resolve the conflict? It's very simple. All the army has to say is, hey guys, we're leaving. Now, if you want to stay among those 160,000 Hebronite Muslims, you can stay. We wouldn't advise it. And as the former head of the Israeli secret police said, he said, I don't believe that they are all that brave. When we leave them out there alone, they'll come. And how they'll come back. It's not so difficult. It's not so impossible. And the current political climate, which for all anyone knows could change rapidly for the worse, but now there's an opportunity. Most of you know the expression, to strike while the iron is hot. There's a possibility now. And if we want to maximize the possibility, and not just to complain, and not just to strike poses, but to actually, finally, to put an end to the conflict and allow the people there to resume a normal life with its good and its bad, then I think now is the time. All we have to do is do two things. Number one, we have to be principled. And being principled is not an abstract idea. It simply means we want to uphold the law. The law is clear. We want to be principled. No one has the right to tell the Palestinians, or anyone else for that matter, that in the interests of peace, they have to forfeit any of their rights. That is unacceptable. A principled position is they have the right to realize their rights and nothing less. And also, in addition to being principled, we need to be realistic. Realistic means let's search hard for ways to resolve the conflict. To the credit of the Palestinians, the so-called Palestinian Authority, I thought on reading through the Palestine papers, on some issues they did pretty well. On the settlements issue, they proposed what I would call a beautiful map to resolve the problem. They were realistic, they were principled, surprisingly so, incidentally, surprisingly so. Just as, in my opinion, we could disagree on it, but for as much as I loathe Mahmoud Abbas, the speech he gave at the UN I thought was good. He struck the right notes. If we're principled and we're realistic, there is a possibility now to resolve the conflict. I've been at this now for nearly 30 years. And it's a very sobering thought that knowledge being so vast, its breadth, its depth, that I've devoted my entire life, my entire adult life, to mastering every detail of this tiny pinprick on the world's map. You take the combined populations of Israel and Palestine, the whole, everything. Israel, West Bank, Gaza, throw in the refugees, take it all, the whole population. And they fit the entire populations in 2 housing projects in Beijing. It's true, the buildings are very tall. Yeah. I've not been there, but that's what I heard. And sometimes I wonder whether I made the right choice in life. Occasionally, I have my doubts, but you know, my best friend is from Hebron. You know Musa Abu Hashesh? Do you know him? Then you're not from Hebron. No, you can't be. When were you there last? When?
20 years ago.
You would still know him. What political party were you in? No embarrassment, he was Communist Party. That's why I stayed with him. In any event, calm down. Running for the exit now. In any case, yeah, sometimes I have my doubts and wonder of the wisdom of my choice. But now I'm more hopeful than ever that something can come of it, of all that hard work. But it can only happen if all of us work together. Professor Said, Edward Said, the Palestinian American, a very articulate defender of the rights of Palestinians, he liked to quote the line of a Caribbean poet, "There's room for everyone at the rendezvous of victory." There's room for everyone at the rendezvous of victory. I think that's right. Just be fair, be reasonable, practice an ordinary principle, doing unto others what you would want done to you. Be fair, be reasonable. And there's room for everyone, Muslim, Christian, Jew, black, white, yellow, and brown. There's room for everyone at the rendezvous of victory. And I'm determined, and I'm a little bit hopeful now, that I might get to that rendezvous of victory. Now, I don't know if I'm going to be, I know I won't be running to it because I can barely run anymore. It's pitiful. It's pitiful when you see these senior citizens going on their walks on the boardwalk at Coney Island and they're going faster than me and I'm running. Very sad sight. So I won't be running. I don't think I'm going to be jogging. I might be using a cane. I might be in a wheelchair. I might be on a stretcher with life supports. But I'm determined to get to that rendezvous of victory. But here's the catch. I can't get there unless you're there with me. Because it ain't going to happen because of the people on the top. It's going to happen just the way it happened in Tunisia, just the way it happened in Egypt, and to the eternal credit, is there any Egyptian here? Who would have ever thought that the demonstrations on Wall Street now, and New York really, it's not just Wall Street anymore, that they say one of their inspirations was Tahrir Square in Egypt. You know, finding now the time, the energy, the will to achieve a just settlement, and also, while we're at it, to try to shake things up a little in our own country and remind that man in the White House who voted for him and why they voted for him. So we have two agendas which don't conflict. That's why the people on Wall Street can say that they were inspired by the Egyptians and they want to shake up what's going on here. And we should be part of both causes, the struggle for Palestine and at the same time the struggle to make this country, the 99%, a fairer and better place to live in. Thank you. I think we'll just go right to questions. Go ahead. If you don't mind, just for the sake of acoustics, to line up at this microphone, it'll just make things move much more smoothly, quickly, and efficiently.
Sorry about that, everybody.
Wait, folks, before you leave, wait 2 seconds. Just 2 seconds. Is there a way to dim the lights? Just give me 2 seconds. Can you go to my website? I want you to see something we created because it's so beautiful. It would be a pity for you to... It's the feedback, I know. Wait. Just go to my website. Just 2 seconds, wait.
During the video, it can only be digital work without permission.
All right, while he's getting everything set up, Students for Justice in Palestine and the Muslim Student Association would like to give a big round of applause to Dr. Finkelstein for coming out here and for He gave a great presentation. I hope that you're all able to take something great away from it. What we'd like to do now is we only have about 20 minutes for a question and answer session. But if you would please have a question, if you just come form a line in the front here, and when he's done with this, he will start to answer your question.
All right, and as we're kind of short on time, so we're just going to get to it as we're waiting for the video to air. The video's here, everyone.
But wait for the...
But they're waiting for my announcement, so as such, I will make the announcement. Here, obviously.